All right, hello, welcome to Collectivism Kills. This is part 2 of the audio upload entitled You Do Not Understand Individualism. And it's based on the article I wrote for my blog, unreformingtheology.com. And the title of that blog is actually The Dissident Right Doesn't Understand Individualism, Exposing the Ignorance of Orrin McIntyre. And I've shortened it simply to You Don't Understand Individualism for the YouTube and audio upload. So, to pick up where we left off, I'm just going to start on page 2 of the article and go from there. If you want to get caught up, go back and listen to part 1, and you'll be all caught up. All right, part 2. And then I started thinking, and after only a few moments, not to brag or anything, I realized the problem. Orrin McIntyre doesn't know what individualism is. I mean, really. Now, the point of this is simply to explain what is individualism really. So if you look at individualism as a philosophy or a philosophical subject based on a specific metaphysical premise, a premise about the nature of man, then we can realize that most of the time people who speak out either for or against individualism don't really understand what it is that they're actually talking about. And there is no better example than Orrin McIntyre and the dissident right. But Orrin McIntyre is not really that important to the subject. That's why I changed the title to simply You Don't Understand Individualism, because whether or not you've heard of Orrin McIntyre or you haven't, it's really irrelevant. The point of this audio upload and what makes it slightly different than the article is that I'm simply trying to get at what exactly is individualism and how is it actually distinct from collectivism. So collectivism and individualism are two entirely different ways of answering the question, what is man? So we have to look at the individual at the metaphysical level. Is man first and foremost a singular self, a single individual conscious agent, or is he a function of some kind of collective identity first? Meaning, what is it that makes man man? Is it himself, or is it the collective? Or is it the group? So that's really the purpose of this upload, is to simply answer that question specifically. But I talk about Orrin McIntyre because he's sort of incidental to how I got to doing this upload via this article, is because of something he said. But he's not particularly important for this topic. So if you want to go and look up who Orrin McIntyre is, you can do that, but it's really immaterial. You don't need to understand really who he is to get what I'm trying to get at here, to understand the point I'm trying to make here. So, but at any rate, just to continue, Orrin McIntyre doesn't know what individualism is. I mean, really, as in he doesn't get that philosophies are formed from primaries, metaphysical primaries, and premises that concern the nature of man and reality, and that these are what's known as metaphysics. And that to truly understand what you're talking about politically, you must understand the metaphysics, especially if you fancy yourself a public intellectual tasked with effectively guiding a dissenting political movement. Because if you don't, you'll wind up making an embarrassment of yourself on YouTube by saying something foolish like individualism is responsible for New World communism. And here I'm simply addressing the idea that Orrin blames the deracination, the rampant degeneracy, the moral relativism of the modern day West, in particular in the United States here, on the idea of individualism. Everybody's simply interested in themselves. It's all about me, me, me. So in other words, he conflates like narcissism and selfishness with individualism. That's not what individualism is. Individualism is a specific definition of man. It's a specific metaphysical interpretation of man at his root nature. So individualism has nothing to do with narcissism or solipsism or selfishness or anything like that. But again, Oren doesn't know what he's talking about. Like most people, when they speak of individualism, they simply mean narcissism or solipsism or you're just being, it's all about me. It's all about me, me, and nothing else and no one else matters. That's not individualism at all. That has nothing to do with individualism. Doesn't say individualism is not narcissism. To be an individualist is to not promote narcissism or solipsism or selfishness. It is simply the metaphysical assertion that man is, in his nature, a singular, conscious self first, and not a function of some kind of collective identity, some kind of group inclusion. Man is himself, first and foremost. Man is not the group. Man is not, first and foremost, the race, the class, the political movement, the team, the tribe, the church. Man is, first and foremost, himself. This doesn't necessarily translate to, it's all about himself. It's all about me. It's never about anyone else. It's always about being an individual first. That has nothing to do with the metaphysics of individualism. But Oren McIntyre doesn't understand this. He's a political ideologue, just like most people are. And so he uses individualism in a way that simply promotes his political ideology. He doesn't have to know what it means. It's just a buzzword. It's just a particular subjective interpretation in order to promote his own ideology. There's nothing, he's not a philosopher. He's a political ideologue. He's a pundit. I guess you could say he's a demagogue, but most intellectuals that represent some kind of a political movement are generally more ideological, more interested in demagoguing an issue than actually getting to the truth, because they're pushing a political ideology. They're pushing a political movement, not a philosophy necessarily, even though they may think they are. They're not. An ideology is not... An ideology is a philosophy, but it's rooted in false metaphysics. But it's not about metaphysics. It's about a particular political agenda. So these people are very superficial when it comes to truly understanding the roots of their ideas. In other words, it's all about power. So language just becomes a way to manipulate the masses in order to get political power. I'm sure Oren doesn't think he's doing this. He thinks he's actually different from the people on the left he opposes, but he's not. He's a political ideologue just like they are. It's all about power. And the proof is that he doesn't understand individualism. See, if he really understood the root of his own ideas, he would understand the distinction between individualism and collectivism at the metaphysical level, and he wouldn't use the term individualism in such an openly false way. But because it's all about power, it's not about understanding ideas or getting to the truth. It's about using language as a means to acquire political power. It becomes a means to compel the masses to agree with you in order to put you into a position of political power. So, So, all right, continuing on here. By individualism, you see, Oren means solipsism, which isn't individualism at all. This solipsism he blames on Enlightenment-based classical Western liberalism, which informs Western so-called representative democracies. You know, John Locke's whole, the individual is the smallest political unit, and the state should consider him thus, and govern in the interest of his inalienable rights to life, liberty, property, right to life, liberty, property, and blah, 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 something to that effect. So solipsism, if you're not familiar with solipsism, is the idea that only oneself can be known to exist. So only oneself, in other words, is real. Everything else is subjective. I am the only thing that's objective. It's just me. I'm the only thing that's real, and therefore I'm the only thing that objectively matters. That is solipsism. Solipsism is not individualism at all. Solipsism, as I'm going to explain here in a minute or two, is actually a version of collectivism. It's just the collectivization of the individualism. It's just the collectivization of the individual. Everything is a manifestation of me. Everything exists to be an expression, an extension of me. I'm the only thing that's real. Therefore, everything else must be, therefore, an extension of me. I'm the only thing that's real. Therefore, what I say goes. Everything else, being subjective, only has objective existence in that it is an expression and a function of myself. So everything and everyone else becomes collectivized into the collective ideal of me. I am the only thing that's real. Everything else which exists only has reality, therefore, insofar as it is a function of my will. So it is a collectivization of the individual. That's what solipsism is. That's not real individualism. Individualism is not solipsism. Individualism doesn't say, I'm the only thing that's real. It says the individual, it says man is first and foremost in his nature himself. He's an expression of his own ability to exist as himself. He's not first and foremost a function of something outside himself. He exists because he is able to exist as what? As himself. That's individualism. Man is not first and foremost an expression of something outside of him. In particular, a collective identity. Man is not first and foremost given his existential value primarily from his group identity, but from his own ability to exist as himself, as an individual. That's all individualism is. Solipsism has nothing to do with that. Solipsism is a collectivist philosophy that uses the individual self as the collective identity, that to which everyone else is obligated to. It's the collectivization of oneself. That's not individualism at all. Hope that makes sense. So, now you might be surprised to learn that I actually agree with Oren that this kind of thinking is indeed the root of the West's current political trauma. In other words, I agree with him. I agree with him that John Locke's idea that the individual is the smallest political unit, while I respect John Locke, and actually I'm directly related to him, he's actually a first cousin of mine, John Locke. I'm on my mom's side, we go back. There's a whole generation of Locks that trace themselves all the way back to John Locke's dad. So, from simply the familial connection, I have respect for John Locke, but I disagree that the individual is a political unit, but his political value is only relevant in a stateless society or a voluntarist society. There is no political unit of any size whatsoever existing under the auspices of government or the state, a legal authority, in other words, that has any value. The only actual value, the only existential value, and the only political value that matters in any society that is governed is the government. No matter how much you want to believe that you live in some kind of a free representative democracy and you have some kind of political value as a member of the great governed masses, you don't. You have no political value. Your political value, in its full sum and substance, is only as an expression of the political ruling class. You serve as a conveyance for the power and wealth of the ruling class. That is your only political value under the auspices of a legal authority, of a government, of a state, period, full stop. So I disagree that the individual has any political value under the auspices of government, ever. And as far as I know, John Locke was not a voluntarist or an anarchist, and therefore I would disagree with his philosophy. But at any rate, you can call the individual, you can say the individual has political value in a governed society. You can say that. You can make the argument that the individual is the smallest political unit. That's fine. But fundamentally, the state, the government, is a collectivist institution. It is not rooted in individualist metaphysics. All governments are inexorably rooted, ineluctably rooted in collectivist metaphysics. Man, first and foremost, is a function of his collective identity. The people, the working class, the race, the tribe, the church. Man has no value in and of himself. His existential value is entirely a function of the collective identity, which is the philosophical root of every government. So you can talk about the individual being the smallest political unit, but it doesn't make any difference. Under the auspices of government, you're still dealing with collectivist metaphysics. There is nothing individual or individualistic about there's nothing fundamentally individualistic about any individual, political or otherwise, under the auspices of government, period. And so while John Locke might be, in some sense, correct that the individual represents the smallest political unit of a society, if that society is governed, meaning it exists under the auspices of a legal authority, there is nothing individualistic about that society at all. The individual has no fundamental value as an individual. His value is always collective. So whether the individual is the smallest political unit or not is irrelevant. Every individual in a society which is governed exists for one reason and one reason only, and that is to serve the state, the ruling class, period. Full stop. It's a function of the inexorable, ineluctable collectivist metaphysics which underwrite government always, in all places, at all times, and in all iterations. That's a fact. That fact is not open to interpretation. That is an objective fact. All governments are collectivist. All individuals, therefore, are nothing. They are only valuable insofar as they are a function of the collective identity which is handed down by the state, the people, the working class, the race, the tribe, whatever. Okay? So, so now you might be surprised to learn that I actually agree with Oren that this kind of thinking is indeed the root of the West's current political trauma, meaning the idea that it's all about me, the sort of moral, the moral relativism, which is really just moral degeneracy. Meaning moral relativism is anti-moral, meaning moral relativism is sort of an oxymoron. Morality is objective. I don't care whatever, I don't care what, look, morality is objective. I've talked about that on my blog many times. Objective morality is a thing. And it's defendable, and I can defend it. Morality is objective. Morality is a thing. Morality is in its nature objective. Morality is simply the ethical premise of individualist metaphysics. It simply says that the individual is the standard of ethical value. That's all morality is. So if the individual is legitimately himself, meaning that if individualist metaphysics are rational and objectively can be objectively verified, in other words, rationally verified. So if individualism or individualist metaphysics are the truth, and the individual is an objective existential expression, meaning that yourself, myself, are objectively real, then we do, in fact, represent an objective ethical standard. And if the ethics of individualism are morality, then morality is likewise objective. All morality says is that the individual is the ethical standard, meaning to violate the person or property or mind of the individual constitutes an objective ethical violation. The ethical standard is observable and it is metaphysically describable in a rationally consistent way. So, if the individual represents an objective metaphysical premise, then the ethics of that individual, which is morality, are also likewise objective. So morality, being objective, cannot be relative. Moral relativism is a contradiction in terms. If there's morality, it's objective. It's always the same everywhere. It's universal. There's no relativity to it. It's not subjective in any context, ever, at any place or time, in any universe. So moral relativism is a lie. Moral relativism is what you get. Well, do I want to get ahead of myself? Moral relativism is what you get. Moral relativism is really what you get when you have a society that has rejected morality, period. So moral relativism is simply the idea of rejecting the individual as having any ethical value. That's really all. Moral relativism is really anti-morality. Moral relativism is really anti-morality, anti-individualistic, anti-individual. It's technically immoral. So, but at any rate, I do, where am I? Yeah, so I disagree with Enlightenment philosophy. The Enlightenment philosophy, because the problem with Enlightenment philosophy, all of our favorite Enlightenment philosophers, Locke and Hume and whoever else, Kant and Hegel, maybe these are all, I could be wrong about those. I haven't brushed up on my 19th century philosophers and 18th and 19th century philosophers in a while, Voltaire or whatever. But Enlightenment philosophy is really the attempt to synthesize the individual with the state. So it's the attempt to sort of synthesize the individual with collectivist metaphysics, and that's why Enlightenment philosophy always kind of fails and gave us, basically Enlightenment philosophy gave us both world wars and mass genocide, and basically the 20th century. The 20th century is the love child of Enlightenment philosophy. And that's what happens when you try to synthesize individualist metaphysics with a collectivist institution like the state. You get chaos. So at any rate, okay. I agree with Oron that this kind of thinking is indeed the root of the West's current political trauma, but it's not because representative democracies are rooted in individualist philosophy, but because the Enlightenment philosophy, which spawned classical liberalism, which in turn spawned the Western representative democracies, and I use representative in quotes, which are now morphing into a global communist tyranny. This Enlightenment philosophy is not, in fact, individualist, like I said, but an inevitably failed attempt to synthesize individualist ethics with collectivist metaphysics. So Western democracies, thus, are not a manifestation of individualism. No, that's the problem. Oren doesn't understand this. Western democracies, like every other government that's ever existed or ever will exist, are not a manifestation of individualist metaphysics. Western democracies, like every government, are collectivist. And therefore, it has nothing to do with the individualism. So what's happening in the West now, because the West is governed, can't have anything to do with individualism, because individualism has nothing to do with government. An individualist society is not a governed society. It cannot be a governed society. Every governed society is collectivist. Therefore, whatever Oren is seeing, whatever problems he's seeing in society now, are not a function of individualism, but of collectivism, because they are a product of the state, which has established the society. Societies follow states, not the other way around. Government precedes society. Society flows down from the state. It flows down from the ruling class. So my point being is that because we live in a governed society, any problems, any social problems, socio-political or economical, etc., problems that Oren is witnessing have nothing to do with individualism at all. Because that's not an individualist context. It's a collectivist context. Societies which are governed are always collectivist contexts. So his problem is with some manifestation of collectivism. That's what he's observing. It has nothing to do with the individual. Again, individualist societies are not governed. They don't function according to legal ethics, they function according to moral ethics. Morality and legality are entirely different ethical systems, rooted in entirely different ethical premises, which are rooted in entirely different metaphysical premises. Legality is the ethics of collectivism. Morality is the ethics of individualism. So if your society is governed according to law, it is not individualist. Because individualist ethics are moral, not legal. The law in a governed society supersedes morality. The law is the final arbiter of right and wrong in a governed society, not morality, period. You can think your law is based on morality. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, in a governed society, the law is the final ethical word on anything. Everything is right under law as long as it's legal. Everything is right and good in a governed society as long as it is legal. If it isn't illegal to lie, if it isn't illegal to steal from the Jews, from the middle class, whatever, I'm referencing history, not anything now, I'm referencing things in history. If it's okay to steal from the Jews, if it's okay to steal from the bourgeois, if it's okay to steal from the aristocratic class, then it is good. It is not unethical. Everything is good and right as long as it's legal. Theft is legal. If theft is good, murder is good, lying is good, propagandizing is good, chattel slavery is good, as long as it is legal. So in a governed society where the law is the ethical standard, everything that's legal is good, is ethically good. Okay? So it's as long as it's legal, it's right. The law is the final arbiter of what is right and wrong in a governed society. And that's because in a governed society functions according to collectivist metaphysics, not individualist metaphysics. So, Western democracies, thus, are not a manifestation of individualism or individualist metaphysics, but of collectivist metaphysics, which attempt to make the individual the collective ideal to which the state will compel the masses. In other words, today's Western representative, quote-unquote, democracies are nothing more than collectivism in individualist clothing. I have an article on my blog called America, the Perfect Tyranny, ? Where I make the argument that America is the perfect kind of tyranny because America fundamentally, if left to run its course, can result in only one thing. The legislation of rank hedonism and object existential chaos. Anything that runs contrary to hedonism and existential chaos will be outlawed. This is what happens when the individual is made the collective ideal. And I don't want to get into that now because it's a relatively complicated metaphysical sort of treatise. But the article's on my blog on reformingtheology.com, and I may do an upload on that because I explain why America, in its attempt to synthesize the individual with the collectivist metaphysics of the state, creates the perfect kind of tyranny. It's the perfect recipe for uncut, pure object, chaos, and hedonism. So my assertion is that if we can define tyranny in levels or degrees, America would represent the pinnacle, the zenith, the capstone of tyranny, the perfect kind of tyranny. Collectivist metaphysics taken to their most rarefied and purest form. Object, categorical hedonism, and existential and epistemological chaos. And this comes from the fundamental attempt of synthesizing individualist ethics with collectivist metaphysics. And the reason for this is because collectivist metaphysics define the individual in a certain way. So if a collectivist institution is tasked with promoting that definition of the individual, the definition of the individual according to collectivist metaphysics, you are going to have rank hedonism and object, existential, and epistemological chaos. So I think it's a good article. I think it's interesting and enlightening, but of course I'm biased. So I encourage you to go check it out on the blog on reformingtheology.com, or you can wait for it here. I'm gonna probably do a video on that at some point. All right, so we're at 31 minutes. I think I might have said enough here. Blah, blah, blah. Should we do... Okay. Maybe we'll do one more paragraph and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. Now, because they, representative democracies, quote unquote, are manifestations of collectivism in disguise, you might be tempted to excuse Oren's ignorance. I assert that he is nevertheless culpable because the collectivism, while disguised, is only very, very thinly disguised. And anyone with an eye to see and an ear to hear can perceive the lie from a mile away. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. If the sheep's clothing consisted of a 10-cent plastic sheep mask affixed with a rubber band and nothing else. So Oren isn't understandably mistaken. He is willfully ignorant. If you promote yourself as some kind of thought leader, political or otherwise, and you don't understand the basic metaphysical differences between collectivism and individualism, you are willfully ignorant. You should know this. If you don't know this, you are a very poor intellectual. So there's no excuse, in my opinion. Anyone who asserts himself implicitly or explicitly as a political thought leader speaking on individualism is obligated to discern the actual metaphysical differences between individualism and collectivism, and should be able to do this in their sleep. Oren, on the other hand, cannot see, or Aaron, I don't know how he pronounces his name. It's not a name I'm particularly familiar with, but and I haven't really listened to anything from him in like 2 years, so I kind of forget how even he pronounces it. But at any rate, Oren, on the other hand, cannot seem to do it in a video that he produced, reviewed, and edited. Scary. And again, I simply go back to the video where he makes the claim that the current problems, socio-political problems we're experiencing in the West are because of individualism. That's just false. It's a lie, but I don't think he's lying. I don't think he knows. That's the scary thing. He's a relatively successful dissident right or dissident right adjacent political thought leader who doesn't know what individualism is and therefore doesn't know what collectivism is. That is scary. And the most scary thing is that Oren is not an outlier. He's not an exception. The vast majority, if not all of your political leadership, have no idea fundamentally what the difference is between individualism and collectivism. They go around and set up whole philosophies, whole ideologies, whole religions, whole government institutions based on ideas that they don't even understand, words they don't understand. So it is a lie to say that the problems we're experiencing in the West are a function of individualism. But he's not a liar. He doesn't know. He really doesn't know. And that's the scary thing. If you don't know metaphysics, if you haven't looked into the metaphysics of your idea, what your idea says fundamentally about the nature of man and reality, where they come from, why they exist, what they represent, what their existential value is, what is their ontological purpose or meaning or worth. If you haven't examined this, if you haven't looked at your most fundamental ideas, religious, political, or otherwise, and examine them for what do they assume about man? Who is man? What is man? Then you have no business being a thought leader of any kind. And the problem is we have too many people out here spouting opinions that haven't spent any time examining the metaphysics which underwrite their ideas. Any time at all. They haven't spent any time. There's a billion YouTube channels, all spouting political ideas and ideologies and opinions that wouldn't even know what metaphysics is if you asked them. Say, what are your metaphysics? They would look at you like you were a frog with 3 heads. They wouldn't know what in the hell you were talking about. It's like this everywhere. If I go to church and I ask a Christian, what is God? None of them, I hazard to say, will say, God represents the metaphysical primary. He represents that from which all things are created and or implied. None of them will tell you this. They will say, he's the creator. They will tell you what he does. He creates. And then they'll say something silly like everything from nothing, as if nothing can produce something, which is a complete conceptual contradiction, in which case you, as a conscious agent, have no frame of reference, but they'll give you some kind of nonsense, ex nihilo kind of creation, kind of blah, blah, blah. But at any rate, none of them will be able to say that God is the metaphysical primary. That's what God is. What he does is create. What he is the metaphysical primary. Now if you have listened to any of my uploads on atheism, know this, but this is the scary thing. These people live their entire lives according to the premise that God exists, is real, and he's in charge of their life. He governs their life. He tells them what to do. He tells them how to vote. He tells them how to act. He tells them what jobs to take, where to live, where to go, where to raise their kids, how many kids to have, how to raise their kids, how to discipline, how to interact with their fellow man, what's right and wrong. And they don't even know what he is. They don't even know what metaphysics is. They don't even know what the word means. And this is the scary thing. And you have a political thought leader representing an entire political movement that wants power over you, me, and everyone, who doesn't even understand the basics of their own ideas. And you wonder why we have genocide and Holocaust and chattel slavery and I can go on. Moral degeneracy, chaos, war, destruction, misery. You wonder why? Because the people promote their ideas and opinions, and they seek to put them into praxis praxis, which is a fine word, without ever really understanding what it is they actually believe. They don't even know. So this is the scary thing. It's not that Oren is a liar when he says. If he was a liar, it would be almost even better, because then at least he would know the difference. He's just lying to you. He'd be just an out-and-out rank liar. You can deal with a liar. They know the truth. You can point the truth out to them, and they blush in shame and run away. He's not a liar. He doesn't know the difference between individualism and collectivism. He doesn't know. That's the scary thing. He really, really thinks he's right. He thinks that everything going on in this country right now, the moral degeneracy, the political collapse, the chaos, the out-of-control prices that make it feel like, post-World War I Germany. We're going to have to start carting our entire bank accounts to the grocery store to buy a carton of eggs pretty soon with the prices of things. There was a time, literally 20 years ago, when I thought paying over $20,000 for a car was crazy. Everybody did. That was an expensive car. Anyway, I won't go into the prices. You know what I'm saying. He thinks all of this is because we're just too individualistic. If we just had a political strongman come along, he could fix all this. Maybe he would for a time, but you know where it would end up? Right back here. It would just be resetting the best that Oren can ever do. The best that he can ever do, ever, the very best, is he can press the reset button on the video game. I'm playing my video game. It's going nowhere. I'm getting killed. I'm dying. I'm losing. It's chaos. It's all chaos. There's no cohesion. It's all degenerating. I can press the reset button. That's all Oren could. That's best case scenario. He can reset institute a new government, a new political ruling class, and start the cycle all over again. It will only ever lead back here. Your political revolution will buy you nothing more than, at best, a resetting of the game. But if you never learn that the game itself is a waste of time and it's based on premises that are entirely false, you'll keep playing the same game over and over with the same results. And then the next Orin will rise up, and the next Orin will rise up, and they'll press reset and reset and reset. And meanwhile, you get to a place where the game can't be reset anymore. There's no more power. There's no more energy. There's no more time. You've run out of time, and that's it. So anyway, that's all I have to say. We'll pick up on this. We'll continue with this next time. And I hope this was interesting to you. If you found any of this interesting or are just feeling charitable, go ahead and like and subscribe. That would be great. But yeah, I think that's about it. So I'll try not to make it 3 weeks until my next upload. But so look for it in the next few days. I don't know when I'll get to it, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And we'll keep going with this. And yeah, I guess I will talk into you later. Thanks for listening and take care. Talk to you later. Bye.